He cried in my lap the night we came home from the hospital. His body still weak, his voice barely above a whisper, but his words, those I'll never forget. Amy, I'll take care of you forever. You'll never have to worry again. I stroked his hair, feeling the warmth of life that I'd almost lost. That's all I ever wanted, Beta. I said, for you to be happy, for you to live. For weeks after, our home felt alive again. The air no longer smelled of medicine, but of home-cooked food and laughter. I cooked his favorite biryani, the one he used to crave during chemo but couldn't eat. He'd tease me, "You still add too much chili, Amy," and I pretend to be offended, knowing it made him smile. We watched old family videos on my phone, his childhood birthday parties, his first school performance. Every clip reminded me of how small he once was, how fiercely I'd loved him since the moment he took his first breath. Those were golden days. Every sunrise felt like a second chance. Every smile he gave me felt like repayment for every night I cried beside his hospital bed. He started helping around the house again, fixing the leaking tap, repainting the front gate, even buying me a new shawl from his first paycheck after recovery. See, Amy? I told you, no more pain, no more sadness. I believed him. I believed in the boy who had once needed me to survive. We'd sit together after dinner, making plans. He said, "Let's get a house just ours, somewhere peaceful." I smiled, imagining mornings with sunlight pouring through new curtains, the smell of tea, the comfort of knowing my son was safe. "Yes," I said, "a fresh start." We started looking at small houses, nothing fancy, just something to call home. I sold the old house my husband had left us, adding that money to my savings. "For you," I told my son, "for our future." He hugged me tight. "You're all I have, Amy." I didn't know then how easily love could become leverage. A few months later, money began to creep into our conversations. He talked about work, about opportunities, about investments. I didn't understand much, only that he was trying to build something. I was proud. When he spoke, his eyes carried a new kind of confidence, one I hadn't seen before. Maybe even a hint of pride that made me both proud and uneasy. One evening, he came home later than usual, holding a brown envelope. "Amy," he said, breathless, "I found the perfect loan for our house. Low interest, short term. We can do this." I looked at the papers, but didn't really read them. The words blurred together. I trusted him. He'd fought death and survived. Surely he knew what was best for both of us. "Just sign here," he said, smiling. "It's just a formality. My name and yours together. It'll look stronger to the bank." I laughed softly. "Formality? You talk like a grown man now." He grinned, that same little boy grin that used to melt my heart. "Because I am Amy. You made me strong." I took the pen, feeling proud that my son had become so responsible. My hand trembled as I signed, not from fear, but from joy. He kissed my forehead afterward and said, "You'll see, Amy. Life is finally turning our way." I didn't question him. I didn't ask what the loan was for or what the fine print said. All I knew was that my son was planning a future. For us, the next morning, I made breakfast and found him already dressed for work, talking on the phone in hushed tones. He looked confident, determined, but when I asked, "Everything okay, Beta?" he simply smiled. "Everything's perfect." For the next few weeks, things felt normal. The new house deal moved forward. But somewhere between the laughter and the papers, between the love and the trust, something small shifted. He stopped talking to me about everything, stopped sitting for tea, stopped asking for advice. And yet, every time he looked at me, there was a shadow behind his smile, like he knew something I didn't. I told myself it was stress, that maybe he was just overwhelmed. But that night, when a letter came from the bank addressed him alone, my heart stuttered. I opened it. I couldn't make sense of the language, but one line caught my eye. "Property transferred under primary ownership. Mr. Saad Rahim." I frowned, whispering to myself, "But that's my house." It was then I felt a chill crawl up my spine. That night, as I tried to sleep, I told myself I was overthinking, that my son, my own child, would never deceive me. But deep down, Something inside me whispered a warning I didn't want to hear. It began with a loan I didn't know I was signing. It started with a knock on my bedroom door and a stack of papers in his hand. He smiled the same way he did when he wanted something. "Amy, can you just sign these for me? It's about the hospital insurance. They're asking for your name, too." I didn't think twice. Why would I? He was my son, my miracle, the boy I carried through sickness and pain. So I took the pen from him, still wearing my reading glasses from stitching clothes that afternoon, and signed wherever he pointed. He kissed my forehead afterward and said softly, "You're my strength, Amy." I didn't notice that he kept the papers close, folding them neatly into his bag before I could even glance again. For a while, everything felt normal. He left for work each morning. Layla brought me tea without sugar, and the house had that fragile peace families pretend is happiness. But the small things started changing, quietly, like whispers you can't catch. A week later, a man in a neat suit came to the house asking for Mr. Saad Rahim. I told him, "That's my son. I'm his mother. Can I help?" He smiled politely and handed me a sealed envelope, just some documents for his records. I placed it on the table, thinking nothing of it. That was the first letter from the bank. Then came another, and another. Each one had the same logo on top, the same confusing words inside: transfer, primary holder, equity. I tried to read them, but the sentences felt like a foreign language. I waited for my son to explain. When he came home, I asked gently, "Beta, what are these letters from the bank? They keep coming." He smiled quickly, too quickly. "Oh, just paperwork. The house mortgage, the insurance, nothing to worry about." I nodded, embarrassed to even ask. He'd grown into a man, after all. I didn't want to sound like a suspicious mother, but something about his tone made my chest tighten. One afternoon, when he was at work, I decided to open one of the envelopes. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside, a formal letter addressed to Mr. Saad Rahim, confirming full property ownership and successful transfer of deed. My eyes blurred. The word seemed impossible. Transfer of deed. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe it was some legal formality. But when I read the last line, "All previous ownership under Mrs. Samina Rahim has been relinquished," my heart froze. I couldn't breathe. The walls around me, the very walls I'd painted, scrubbed, prayed within, suddenly felt unfamiliar. I sat there in silence, the paper trembling in my hands, the sound of the ceiling fan the only thing keeping me grounded. That evening, when he came home, I confronted him gently. "Saad, what's this?" I held the letter in front of him. "It says the house is under your name now." He frowned. "Amy, please, don't get upset. It's just a legal formality. I'm protecting our future." "Protecting?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "By taking my house?" He sighed, running his hands through his hair. "You don't understand how the world works, Amy. Everything is easier if the property is under my name. It's safer. For both of us." I stared at him, searching for the boy who once promised to take care of me forever. All I saw was a man speaking like a stranger, confident, dismissive, almost cold. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. He hesitated, then looked away. "Because you'd worry." And I didn't want to argue. I felt something inside me crack. Not anger, not yet, but a slow, painful realization that trust can be the cruelest trap of all. That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of my house. The same creaking floorboards, the ticking clock. But all felt different. It wasn't mine anymore. Every photo on the wall, every curtain I'd chosen, every memory suddenly belonged to someone else. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, and Layla was already there. She looked at me differently, her smile polite but distant. She said, "Saad," and I were thinking of redecorating soon, maybe repainting the living room. Repainting. My heart clenched. I forced a smile. "It's your home," I said softly. "Do what you like." She nodded, not noticing the weight of my words. When I went back to my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the old photo Saad as a little boy, his toothy grin, his hand clutching mine. I whispered to the photo. I gave you everything, and you've taken even that. Outside my door, I heard him laughing with his wife, carefree, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The papers I'd signed in love had turned into chains around my heart. My home no longer felt like safety. It felt like a secret I wasn't supposed to discover. And as I lay in that house that night, surrounded by my memories, one truth hit me harder than any betrayal could. My son had turned me into a guest in my own home. She entered my house with perfume and promises. At first, I thought she was an answer to my prayers, a woman who would love my son the way I had. Her name was Layla. Pretty, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who smiled with her lips but never with her eyes. The day he introduced her, my son held her hand so tightly, I almost didn't recognize him. "Amy," he said proudly, "this is the woman I'm going to marry." I forced a smile, even though something inside me tightened. "You didn't tell me you were seeing someone." He laughed, embarrassed. "I wanted to surprise you," and surprised I was. They married quickly. Too quickly, if you ask me. One day my son was my whole world. The next he had built a new orbit where I was just a distant star. When she moved in, she was polite. She called me Amy John, helped with chores, even made me tea in the mornings. But slowly, I began to feel her presence everywhere, subtle, careful, deliberate. One morning I walked into the kitchen and saw her rearranging the spice jars. "Beta," I said gently, "I keep them by flavor. Salt and turmeric on the left, chili and cumin on the right." She smiled without looking up. "Oh, I know, Amy John, but Sa likes things tidy. It's easy my way. Sa likes things tidy." Her tone was sweet, but her meaning wasn't. In the days that followed, my kitchen became hers. My routine became her routine. My son's voice, once warm with love, became cautious, filtered through her moods. He began to speak differently. The little jokes we used to share, gone. He started correcting the way I spoke, the way I did things. "Amy, don't worry. Layla knows how to handle this," he'd say. And then came the small cruelties, the kind that don't look like cruelty to outsiders. One night, at dinner, I added extra salt to the curry. My hands trembled as I placed the bowl on the table. Layla tasted it, smiled thinly, and said, "Maybe next time I'll cook 'em." Saad's stomach is sensitive. He chuckled, not even glancing my way. I felt invisible. The next morning, she changed the curtains I'd chosen years ago. When I asked why, she said softly, "We just wanted something brighter. The old ones felt depressing." The house no longer looked like mine. Everywhere I turned, her touch replaced mine. New colors, new smells, new rules. Even my son's words changed. He stopped calling me Amy. One day, while talking to me in front of a neighbor, he said, "Samina, could you please bring the guest list?" Samina, my name. The word felt like a slap. That night, I cried quietly in my room. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't notice. He didn't even realize what he'd taken from me. I told myself it was just adjustment, that Layla was trying to fit in. I even prayed for her happiness, hoping maybe love would soften her. But her silences grew sharper, her smile shorter. Sometimes, I'd find her standing at the window, whispering to someone on the phone, her tone low and irritated. When I entered, she'd stop talking and say, "Oh, it's just my friend," then walk away. The distance between me and my son grew, quiet and invisible. He spent more time outside the house, less time sitting with me. And when he did, his eyes followed her every movement, as if waiting for her approval. I began to realize she didn't just want a husband. She wanted control. One evening, I was folding clothes when I overheard them arguing in the next room. Layla's voice was calm but cold. "You said you'd handle it. She still treats this house like it's hers." My breath caught. I pressed my ear against the wall. Saad sighed. "She's my mother, Layla. Please." "No," she interrupted. "She was your mother. Now she's just living here." Her words pierced me like glass. Later that night, I confronted her in the hallway. "Layla," I said quietly, "I know I may not be perfect, but I've always respected you. Why do you speak about me that way?" She looked at me, her face expressionless. Then she smiled, a slow, practiced smile. "Because it's true," she whispered. "This isn't your house anymore." For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the air between us heavy with something poisonous. And then she turned away, her voice low but steady. "Your time here is over." Her words hung in the air like smoke. And for the first time, I realized I was living with strangers inside my own home. They said he might not make it through the night. Those words still echo inside me, like a knife that never stopped twisting. The hospital smelled like bleach and fear. Machines hummed beside my son's fragile body. Each beep reminded me that his heart was still trying, still fighting to stay. I stood by his bed, clutching his cold hand, whispering prayers into the void. My son, my only child, my reason for breathing. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. My lips were cracked, my body numb. But I didn't care. All I wanted was one more day with him. Just one more smile. The doctor said the treatment would be expensive. "We'll need another round of chemo," they told me, eyes heavy with pity. I nodded even though I knew I couldn't afford it. That night, I went home and opened my jewelry box. The gold bangles my mother gave me on my wedding day, gone by morning, sold for a fraction of their worth. The next day, I borrowed from friends, then from people I'd never thought I'd have to beg. I lost count of how many doors I knocked on, how many humiliations I swallowed. But when you're a mother, pride is the first thing you sacrifice. I remember sitting on the hospital floor outside the ward, my hands trembling as I counted the crumpled bills. The nurse placed her hand on my shoulder, whispering, "You're a strong woman." Strong. That word felt heavy then. Because strength didn't come from choice, it came from desperation. Days turned into weeks. His hair fell out, his laughter disappeared. I watched my little boy fade into something pale and unrecognizable. But every morning, I told him, "You're going to be okay, Beta. Ammy's here." Sometimes he'd open his eyes and whisper, "Don't cry, Ammy. I'm not scared." And that would break me all over again. One night, when his fever wouldn't break, I ran to the hospital chapel. I fell on my knees and begged, "Take anything from me, but don't take my child." My voice cracked until it was just air and tears. That same night, something changed. The next morning, the doctor smiled for the first time in months. "His body's responding," he said. "It's a miracle." I rushed to his room. My son was awake, weak but smiling faintly. His voice was a whisper when he said, "Ammy." I froze. I hadn't heard that word in weeks. I fell beside him, clutching his hand. "I'm here, my love. I'm here." He smiled. "You didn't sleep, did you?" I shook my head through tears. "How could I? You're my world." For the first time, his small fingers tightened around mine. That touch, so fragile, so full of life, felt like the universe had handed me a second chance. I promised myself I'd never let anything harm him again. The doctors called it recovery. I called it mercy. The day he was discharged, I stood outside the hospital with him in my arms, his body thinner, his face softer, but alive. The sunlight felt like a blessing. People congratulated me, saying I was lucky, but it wasn't luck. It was sacrifice, sleepless nights, and love that bled itself dry. At home, I cooked his favorite meal, chicken curry, extra spicy just how he liked it. He laughed weakly, teasing, "You'll never stop worrying about me, will you, Ammy?" I smiled through tears. Never. That night, as he slept peacefully beside me, I stared at his face in the dim light. I whispered promises into the dark. Promises of love, of safety, of a lifetime of care. He was my everything, my miracle, my reason for living. And yet, deep down, a quiet fear lingered. What if love could turn into something else? Something colder? I brushed the thought away and kissed his forehead, whispering, "You'll never be alone, my son. I promise." I didn't know then that those words would curse me more than they'd comfort him. I promised him everything. It felt like a knife slipped into the room quietly, hidden inside her smile. That night, I learned what betrayal truly sounds like. It doesn't scream. It whispers through the voice of your own child. Dinner was silent except for the clinking of spoons. The tension between us was thick enough to choke on. I had made biryani his favorite, hoping maybe the old flavors could remind him who he used to be. He barely touched it. Layla pushed the food around her plate, glancing at him, waiting. And then she did it. She placed her hand gently over his, her tone soft, practiced, calm. "Saad," she said, "we can't live like this anymore." For a moment, I thought she meant their marriage, that maybe, finally, she'd grown tired of the coldness she created. But then my son spoke, still staring at his plate. "Amy, we decided it's best if you move to a care home." I froze. My spoon slipped from my hand, landing in the curry with a dull splash. I waited for him to laugh, to say it was a misunderstanding. "Saad," I whispered, "what did you say?" He didn't look at me. Not once. His voice was steady, rehearsed. "You'll be more comfortable there. There'll be people your age, proper care, a clean environment." It sounded like a speech he'd practiced in the mirror. Every word clipped polite final. I looked at Layla. Her expression was calm, almost satisfied. She reached into a folder and slid something across the table, a glossy brochure, full of smiling old faces and tidy rooms. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. Sunrise Elder Residence. I felt my chest tighten. The air left my lungs like someone had stolen it. "You're sending me away?" "No, Amy," he said quickly. "It's not like that. We need space. We need space." The same boy who once clung to me in fear of dying now couldn't bear to share the same roof. I tried to find words, but all that came out was a broken laugh. "You're joking. This is a joke." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." Harder? He had no idea what hard meant. Hard was watching him fight for his life. Hard was selling my gold, my memories, to pay for his survival. And this was cruelty disguised as practicality. I stood up, my chair scraping the floor. "You promised me, Saad," I said, my voice shaking. "You promised to take care of me. You said we'd always have each other." He finally looked up, and for the first time, I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger. "People change, Amy," he said quietly. "Lives change." Layla reached over and touched his arm like she was soothing a child. I wanted to scream. Instead, I gathered my plates and walked into the kitchen, afraid my tears would betray me. The walls that once held laughter now echoed with silence. Every photograph, every memory, every corner of that house felt foreign. It was as if I had already been erased. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the brochure still clutched in my hand. I traced a glossy photo of a smiling woman with silver hair, pretending she was happy. That wasn't comfort. It was exile, decorated with flowers. I could hear them laughing softly in the living room, the sound of their new life beginning as mine quietly ended. I opened my wardrobe and began folding my clothes, not because I agreed to leave, but because I couldn't stand to stay where I wasn't wanted. Every shirt carried a memory. His school uniform I once ironed, the sweater I'd knitted during his chemo. My tears fell on the fabric, leaving tiny dark stains that looked like bruises. By the time the clock struck midnight, my small suitcase was full. I stood in the doorway, looking around one last time at the house that had once held everything I loved. My heart was breaking, but my spine stayed straight, because they could take my home, my comfort, even my dignity for a while, but not my pride. I packed my bag that night, but not my pride. The first thing that hit me wasn't the smell, it was the silence. A silence, so heavy it felt like a second skin on my body, a weight pressing me down. When I walked through the automatic doors, the scent of bleach stung my nose. The air was sharp, metallic, sterile. But underneath it lingered something harder to describe, like stale tea and forgotten lives. A woman in a wheelchair stared at me as I passed. Her eyes were pale and empty, like she'd been waiting for years for someone who never came. In that moment, I felt like I'd stepped into my own grave. They showed me my room. Bare walls, a single bed, a small dresser. The curtain by the window was frayed at the edges. There was a tiny television bolted high up on the wall, showing an old soap opera with the sound off. I sat on the bed and touched the cold metal railings. My fingers trembled. I thought about my son, about how once he had been so small he fit inside my arms. I thought about the nights I held his hand in that hospital, whispering prayers over his feverish body. I'd promised God I'd give anything for him to survive. I hadn't known that anything would mean my life, my home, my dignity. The tears came without permission, hot and quick. I buried my face in my palms. Ya Allah, I whispered, why did you bring me here? I remembered the brochure Layla had slid across the table, its smiling old faces. There was no smile here, only the slow hum of wheelchairs and nurses' footsteps echoing down the corridor. At lunch, they led me to a dining hall, a long row of tables, most filled with silent women. One lady muttered to herself. Another stared at the ceiling fan, following its slow circles with her eyes. I sat at the end, picking at a plate of overcooked rice and bland curry. A nurse placed a glass of water beside me. You'll get used to it, she said absently. I don't want to get used to it, I murmured. She didn't hear me. Later that evening, I sat in the courtyard, clutching my shawl against the wind. A pair of sparrows hopped along the cracked pavement, picking at crumbs. The sunset cast long, tired shadows over the walls. I overheard two staff members talking by the door. Their voices were low, but the words carried like knives. She's the one said. The one what? Her son's the one who took her house, right? Transferred it and dumped her here. I felt the words hit my chest like a slap. My breath caught. They knew. Everyone knew. It was as if my shame had been pinned to my back like a sign. I was no longer just a resident. I was a story whispered in hallways. I turned my face away so they wouldn't see my tears. But it wasn't sadness anymore. It was something hotter, sharper, rising from a place I thought had gone dead inside me. I remembered selling my jewelry for his treatment. I remembered the nights without sleep, the hospital bills I didn't understand. I remembered him promising me, I'll take care of you, Amy. Always. And now the anger was so strong it burned away my weakness. It sat in my chest like fire, like breath returned to lungs that had been empty. I stood up, my knees trembling but my back straight. The courtyard felt different under my feet. Not like a cage, but like a starting line. Inside, the other women were sitting in the lounge, eyes on the flickering TV. Some of them had been here so long they'd forgotten their own voices. I wasn't going to become one of them. That night, lying in my narrow bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought of my son. For the first time, I didn't feel only pain, I felt clarity. He had taken everything from me, but he had underestimated the one thing he couldn't take, my will. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I made a promise to myself. I would not fade away in this place. I would not let my story end in a room that smelled of bleach and loneliness. I realized I wasn't done fighting yet. I had never walked into a lawyer's office before. But that morning, I walked in with trembling hands, clutching my shawl like a shield. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out the sounds of the street outside. The sign above the door read Community Legal Aid. It was a small building, paint peeling off the walls, but inside it smelled of paper and old wood. I paused in the doorway, fighting the urge to turn around and run. I told myself, you survived worse. I had survived hospital corridors, my son's betrayal, the nursing home. This was only another kind of battlefield. A young man looked up from his desk as I entered. He had neat hair, glasses, and eyes that softened when they met mine. Please, he said, standing, come sit down. My voice trembled. I don't know where to begin. He gestured to a chair. Start anywhere. I sat and began to speak. At first the words stumbled out, but then they poured like water from a cracked jar. How I'd sold everything for my son's treatment. How he brought papers for me to sign. How he and his wife had pushed me into the nursing home. His eyebrows lifted higher and higher as I spoke. You're saying he transferred the house into his name while you were under the impression it was insurance paperwork? He asked. Yes. My hands twisted together in my lap. I didn't question him. He was my son. I trusted him more than myself. The young lawyer leaned back in his chair. I'm sorry, he said quietly. But legally, those signatures gave him full ownership. It felt like a blow to the chest. I gripped the armrest of the chair, trying to breathe. So it's over? He hesitated, then leaned forward again. Not necessarily. My head snapped up. What do you mean? If you can prove manipulation or coercion, he said, choosing his words carefully, you still have a chance. Courts can overturn agreements signed under undue influence, especially when it involves elderly parents and significant assets. For a moment, the room felt brighter. A crack of light in a windowless cell. Coercion? I whispered. Did he pressure you? The lawyer asked. Was there any deception involved? Did you understand what you were signing? I thought of the folder he had handed me, the way he'd smiled reassuringly, the way Layla had stood nearby, silent, watching. No, I said softly. I didn't understand. I trusted him. He said it was insurance for his treatment. The lawyer's eyes sharpened. That's not insurance paperwork. That's a property transfer. I could almost hear my own heartbeat. The words felt like a lifeline thrown into deep water. I want to fight, I said suddenly. My voice surprised me. It was steady, almost fierce. He nodded slowly. We'll start by gathering evidence. Medical records, financial transactions, any witnesses. It won't be easy. I don't care, I said. I've lost everything already. What's left to lose? For the first time in months, my tears weren't from pain. They were from rage and resolve. I wiped them quickly with the edge of my shawl. Outside the window, the street bustled with noise, children running past, a fruit vendor calling his prices, the faint honk of cars. Life went on, indifferent, but I felt something stirring in me. I had walked in as a victim. I was walking out as something else entirely. I stood and shook his hand. Thank you. I whispered. We're not done yet, he said. This is just the beginning. As I stepped back onto the street, the sun hit my face. The wind smelled of dust and possibility. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of my mother's love turning into power. When you've been betrayed by your own blood, confronting them feels like walking barefoot over glass. But I'd already bled enough. Now, I was ready to let him see the cuts he'd left behind. For weeks, I worked with a lawyer, gathering every shred of proof I could find. Old hospital bills with my signature beside his. Text messages where he'd promised. It's just paperwork. Receipts showing how I'd paid for every treatment, every bill, every breath that had kept him alive. Each document was a wound reopened. Each memory another scar I refused to hide anymore. Sometimes, late at night in the nursing home, I'd spread the papers across my narrow bed. I'd trace my trembling finger over his handwriting, remembering when he used to write me little notes. Love you, Amy. Now those same letters were evidence of deceit. When the hearing date finally came, I dressed in the only nice clothes I had left, a pale green shower camise, freshly ironed by the kind nurse who'd started calling me Auntie. You look strong today, she said softly. I have to be, I whispered. I'm going to face my son. The courtroom was colder than I expected. A faint hum of ceiling fans filled the air. Wooden benches lined the back wall, their polish faded from years of stories like mine. Parents versus children, trust versus greed. I spotted him before he saw me. My son, Maisad, sat in a press suit beside his wife, Layla. Her bangles glinted under the lights. Her expression calm, unreadable. He looked older, harder. The boy I had once nursed through nights of pain was gone. In his place sat a man defending the theft of his own mother's life. When our eyes met, something flickered in his shock, maybe, or guilt. He leaned slightly forward, whispering, Amy, why are you doing this? For a moment, I almost broke. His voice still carried that soft lilt from childhood, the one that used to melt my heart. But then I remembered the brochure, the locked nursing home door, the laughter I'd heard from their living room as I packed my bag. I met his gaze, steady and unblinking. Because you already did this to me. I didn't say it aloud, but I saw the words land in his eyes, heavy and silent. The lawyer beside me nodded as the judge entered. Everyone rose. My knees trembled, but my spine stayed straight. Case number 204. The clerk announced, "Property dispute. Mrs. Nargis versus her son, Mr. Saad." The irony of hearing my own child's name read out like that nearly split me in half. Layla whispered something to him, and he nodded without looking up. My lawyer leaned closer. "Stay calm," he murmured. "Let the facts speak." But facts were cold things. They couldn't capture sleepless nights, the sound of your son's weak breathing, or the taste of the tears you swallowed while begging God to spare him. Still, I was ready to speak my truth, not as a victim, but as a mother betrayed. The proceedings began. The opposing lawyer stood, confident and smooth, reading from papers filled with legal jargon. "Your Honor," he said, "my client's mother willingly signed all transfer documents. There was no pressure, no deception. Willingly." The word rang in my ears like a slap. I wanted to stand and shout, "Willingly? Did they think love made you blind by choice?" My lawyer interrupted, calm but firm. "We will show evidence suggesting manipulation and emotional coercion. Mrs. Nargis was misled by her son into believing these were hospital insurance documents." The judge nodded. "Understood. Proceed." The room went silent. My heart pounded so loudly it filled my head. I looked once more at my son. He couldn't meet my eyes. He shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. And in that single moment, I saw it. The guilt trying to hide beneath pride. He wasn't as strong as he pretended. I felt something stir inside me again. Not just anger, but strength. The kind only pain can create. The judge's voice broke through the silence. "We will hear the mother's testimony first." And as every eye in that courtroom turned toward me, I stood, slowly, proudly, ready to unmask my son before the world. They made me raise my right hand and swear to tell the truth. But I didn't need to swear. The truth had already been carved into my bones. My palms were trembling as I stepped forward, but my heart felt strangely calm, like a storm that had finally decided where to land. The judge nodded for me to begin. My lawyer gave a small, reassuring smile. And then I spoke. I told him about the hospital nights, how my son's body had wasted away, how I'd sold everything to keep his treatment going. My gold, my furniture, even the last piece of land my husband had left behind. I spoke of the prayers whispered into pillows, soaked with tears. My voice trembled at first, but it found its rhythm in the ache. When he recovered, I said softly, "I thought it was a miracle. I thank God for saving him. I never imagined that the son I saved would one day throw me away." The courtroom was still. Even the clerk had stopped typing. I could feel everyone watching me. The lawyers, the judge, the strangers in the back rows. But I wasn't speaking to them. I was speaking to him. My son. I turned to look at him, and for a moment our eyes met. His were red, his jaw clenched. Layla sat beside him, pretending calm but shifting uneasily. "I signed those papers," I continued, "because he told me they were hospital insurance forms. He said it was for our safety, our future. I didn't read them. I trusted him, because a mother shouldn't have to fear her own child." My throat burned, but I didn't stop. And when he took that trust and turned it into betrayal, it didn't just break my heart. It broke something sacred. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Nargis," he said gently, "you're saying you were unaware that you were signing a property transfer?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I didn't know. I didn't even imagine such cruelty was possible." My son's lawyer stood. "Objection! She's dramatizing the situation." The judge raised a hand. "Let her speak." So I did. I told him about the day I was sent to the nursing home, the dinner table, the silence, the brochure, how I'd packed my bag with shaking hands, whispering to God that maybe death would have been kinder. Each word felt like reopening an old wound. But this time, the bleeding was necessary. This time, it meant healing. When I finished, the courtroom stayed silent for several seconds. The sound of my own breathing filled my ears. I looked again at my son. He wasn't the proud man I remembered from the earlier hearings. He looked smaller now, cornered by truth. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, his shoulders slumped. "Ammi," he whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "please stop." My chest ached. That word, Emmy, it had been months since I'd heard it from his mouth, but it was too late for that now. I straightened my back and met his gaze. I did stop once. I said, when you told me to leave my home, when you told me I didn't belong, I won't stop again. The judge cleared his throat, breaking the tension. We will review the evidence, he said. Court is adjourned until next hearing. The gavel hit the desk with dull crack, echoing through the hall. As people stood and began to file out, I stayed seated for a moment, breathing in the quiet. I didn't know if I would win the case. The law could be cruel, just like life, but I knew something far greater had been returned to me. My dignity, my voice, my strength. I stood up slowly, gathered my shawl around my shoulders. The same shawl I had worn in the hospital, the same one that had soaked up tears of fear and grief. Today, it felt like armor. As I walked past him, I paused. He didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the floor, his hands shaking. For the first time, I realized the truth. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the self someone tried to destroy. And as I stepped out into the sunlight, I knew one thing for certain. Even if I lost my house, he'd lost his mother's heart. The day of the verdict, I didn't pray for victory. I just prayed for peace, whatever form it decided to take. When the judge began reading, my heartbeat was so loud it drowned his words. My lawyer's lips moved, but I barely heard him. All I caught were fragments. Property remains is lifelong care, housing guaranteed. Then silence. My lawyer touched my arm gently. It's partial justice, he whispered. He keeps the house, but he's legally bound to provide for you for life. I nodded, numb. I wanted to feel grateful, relieved, vindicated. But all I felt was a hollow ache, like winning a war after losing your homeland. The courtroom emptied slowly. My son didn't look back as he left. Only Layla's perfume lingered in the air, sharp and sweet, as if mocking the years I had spent washing her clothes, cooking her meals, pretending her coldness didn't pierce me. I walked out of that room not as a mother or a victim, but as a survivor who had buried her last illusion. Back at the small apartment the court arranged for me, I stared at the walls. They were clean but silent. There were no family photos, no laughter echoing down hallways, just the hum of a refrigerator and the distant sound of rain tapping against the window. My lawyer called again that evening. You did it, he said softly. You stood your ground. You should be proud. I smiled faintly. Pride doesn't fill empty rooms, I murmured. He didn't know what to say after that. Later that night, someone knocked. For a moment, I thought it was another neighbor or a delivery mistake. But when I opened the door, my heart froze. It was him, my son. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. The arrogance in his shoulders was gone. His eyes, once sharp and dismissive, were red, wet human. Ammy, his voice cracked. Can I come in? I hesitated. Then, quietly, I stepped aside. He sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at the floor like a guilty child. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked. My chest felt tight, full of memories I didn't want to remember. Finally, he said, I'm sorry. 2 words. So small, so late. I wanted to scream. To ask him where that sorry was when I packed my bag, when I sat alone in that nursing home, when strangers whispered about the son who took her house. Instead, I just looked at him. Why now? I asked. He swallowed hard. Because I saw you in court, and for the first time, I saw what I'd done. Tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. You didn't just take my home, I said quietly. You took my trust. He nodded, trembling. Will you ever forgive me? The room seemed to shrink around us. I could smell the rain, the damp earth outside. Forgiveness. A word people throw around like it's simple, like it can erase what's been done. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out into the dark street. Then I turned back to him. Forgiveness, I said, my voice steady, is not the same as forgetting. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe because I was finally seeing it for what it had become, a place that held more pain than love. When I walked through the gate, the garden was overgrown, the jasmine vines tangled and dry. I used to trim them every Friday, humming to myself. Now, they looked like they'd stopped breathing the day I left. Layla opened the door. Her expression was neutral, polite, but her eyes flickered with discomfort. "Your things are in the living room," she said quietly, stepping aside. I didn't answer her. I couldn't. The air inside was heavy, like it remembered the arguments, the tears, the betrayal. I walked slowly through each room, touching the walls as though saying goodbye to an old friend who'd turned into a stranger. The kitchen, my kingdom once, was different. The spice jars I'd labeled in my careful handwriting were replaced with shiny, color-coded containers. My old tea kettle was gone. Even the smell was foreign, sterile, like someone had erased me from the center of the house. My son stood in the corner, eyes downcast. He looked older now, tired, worn out, guilty. "Ammy," he whispered, "you can take whatever you want." I paused by the old wooden chair near the window, the one where I used to sit and pray when he was sick. My fingers traced the faded wood. "I already took what I needed," I said softly. He frowned. "What do you mean?" "My peace," I replied. He flinched, like the word itself had cut him. I packed quietly, just a few clothes, my Quran, an old photo album. Layla stayed in the kitchen, pretending to be busy. The silence between us was sharp, filled with everything we'd never said. When I was ready to leave, my son followed me to the door. "Ammy," his voice trembled. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm trying to make things right now." I turned to him. "Making things right starts with telling the truth to yourself." He nodded slowly, tears gathering in his eyes. "I see that now." For a moment, I almost reached out, almost touched his face like I used to when he was a boy. But then I remembered the cold paper he'd made me sign, the day he took everything I had. That memory stopped my hand midair. Instead, I said, "Take care of her and of the house. They're both yours now." As I stepped outside, the evening light fell across the walls. I could hear children laughing somewhere down the street, a sound that didn't belong to this house anymore. I closed the gate behind me, the metal creaking like a final goodbye. Each step away felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying guilt or anger or hope, just truth. When I reached the corner, I turned once, just once, and saw him standing by the doorway, watching me go. He raised his hand, but I didn't wave back. Some goodbyes aren't meant to be answered. As I walked into the fading sunset, I realized something. Justice doesn't always come in courtrooms or judgments. Sometimes justice is simply the strength to walk away, still human. Some nights, I still wake up thinking I hear him calling, "Ammy." Then I remember I live alone now, and silence has become my only company. My new home is small, just one rented room tucked behind a bakery. It smells of sugar and bread in the mornings, and I place flowers on the windowsill, bright marigolds that turn toward the light, even after being cut from their roots. I suppose I'm a little like them. I don't have much, but everything here is mine. The teacup, the worn prayer mat, the creaky bed, all simple things that don't lie, don't change, don't betray. Sometimes when I pour tea, I still make 2 cups by mistake. Old habits are stubborn. I stare at the empty cup, watching the steam fade, and whisper, "May God protect you wherever you are." Not because I've forgotten what he did, but because carrying hate feels heavier than being alone. The truth is, I stopped waiting for an apology long ago. Waiting keeps the wound open. Healing begins when you close the door gently, not slam it. One afternoon, I saw a mother and son pass by my window. The boy was laughing, holding his mother's hand. The sight pierced me for a moment, sharp and quick. But then I smiled, because somewhere in this world, love still lives the way it should, without conditions, without contracts, without signatures. I turned to my Quran and whispered a prayer, not for revenge, not for wealth, but for peace. Ya Allah, teach him what love truly means. Maybe one day, my son will remember the nights I sat beside his hospital bed, praying for his heartbeat. Maybe he'll realize that the house he took was just bricks, but the home he lost was me. The neighbors sometimes invite me for tea. They call me Ani. I like the sound of it. It's warm, simple, free of history. I help their children with homework, tell them stories, and laugh at their questions. No one here knows my past, and that's how I like it. They see me as I am now, not who I was broken by. Every evening, before sunset, I sit by the window, watching the light fade over the rooftops. That's when I pray. Not the desperate kind I used to whisper in hospital corridors, but quiet prayers of gratitude, for a breath, for peace, for another day to live without fear. Sometimes I wonder if he ever drives by this street, if he ever slows down, seeing an old woman with silver hair sitting by a window full of flowers. If he ever realizes that peace doesn't come from power, it comes from letting go. But I don't wait for him anymore. I don't chase ghosts or memories or sons who have lost their way. I saved his life once. Now I've saved mine. And if he ever knocks on my door again, I hope it's not for forgiveness, but for understanding.